They mocked him for being slow, called him the rusted old man in room 112. No one knew why he stared at the garden rocks for hours, or why he tapped the arm of his wheelchair like it meant something. Until one stormy morning, a young nurse found a notebook in the attic, a notebook that was never supposed to exist. And when a colonel recognized the tattoo on his arm, the entire army rewrote the story they'd taught for 50 years. Some ghosts disappear. This one waited for the right person to remember. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. Tucked deep in the hills of eastern Tennessee, there's a place most folks don't think much about, a red brick nursing home called Maple Hill. It sits at the end of a winding road, quiet as the mountain air, and in room 112, past the faded wallpaper and creaky hallway lights, lived a man named Thomas Granger. No one really knew much about him. He didn't speak unless he had to, didn't play bingo, didn't join birthday parties, didn't ask for extra pudding on Sundays. He kept to himself. People said he was a retired blacksmith. There were old photos on his dresser, iron gates, a forge, a dog. Always the same, 1 of fire, 1 of steel, and 1 of silence. Most of the staff at Maple Hill left him alone. But that didn't stop the whispers. Thomas Granger. That old guy's been here forever. He just stares at rocks out in the garden. For hours, he creeps me out. A young janitor once said, always tapping on the railing like he's sending Morse code or something. It wasn't unkind, exactly. But it wasn't kind either. They didn't see him as a person, just a shadow that drifted from breakfast to bed. And then there was head nurse Mathers. She had been working at Maple Hill for 19 years, and she didn't care much for Thomas. Every time she passed his door, her eyes rolled just slightly. He's taking up a room someone else could use, she muttered more than once. Never smiles. Never says thank you. Just sits there like a statue. Might as well be one. To her, Thomas wasn't worth the effort. What most people didn't know was that Thomas still woke up at exactly 4:35 every morning. No alarm clock. Just the habit of a man who'd once had to move before the sunrise could reveal his position. He'd dress himself slowly, one sock at a time, then roll out to the back patio with a worn notebook tucked under his lap blanket. He never wrote in it, just opened it and stared. Some days he'd trace the edge of the pages with his fingers, as if remembering something long buried, a map maybe, or a trail that used to exist. Other days, he tapped gently on the armrest of his wheelchair, rhythmic, purposeful, like the beat of distant boots on dry ground. And if you listened closely, you'd hear him humming. Not a song, just a sequence of tones, almost like a call sign, but nobody listened. Not really. Until the morning the roof leaked, it was the tail end of spring, and a thunderstorm had rolled through the night before. Water had seeped through the attic and down into the corner room on the 3rd floor. Maintenance needed to clear out the storage boxes fast, before mold set in, but half the staff had called out sick. That's when Mallory Evans, the new nursing intern, volunteered. She was only 26, just 3 weeks into the job, still learning which residents liked warm milk and which ones didn't like to be touched. She wore her hair in a ponytail and kept her ID badge tucked into her hoodie, polite, observant, and the kind of person who noticed things no one else did. The attic was hot and dusty. Mallory pulled on gloves, grabbed a flashlight, and began stacking boxes to move them downstairs. Most of it was junk old newsletters, broken folding chairs, a cracked snow globe from 1984. But one box near the far corner caught her eye. Not because of what was in it, but because it was locked. A thin leather strap wrapped tightly around a dark brown book. The cover was marked with scuffs and scratches, but right there, pressed into the center, almost faded from time, were the words Operation Iron Horse, 1972, for eyes that no longer exist. Mallory frowned. She had grown up around veterans. Her father, now retired, served 2 tours in Vietnam. Her uncle was a supply tech in Iraq. She'd heard stories, some real, Some half whispered about missions that never made it into the newspapers. Ghost ops, her father called them, the kind where you came home without a name, if you came home at all. She brought the notebook downstairs and handed it to the front desk. I found this in the attic, she said. The receptionist, a tired woman with coffee breath and too many responsibilities, gave it a quick glance. Looks old, she mumbled. Probably belonged to one of the dementia patients back in the 80s. She placed it in the lost and found tray. Didn't even ask Mallory for her name. Later that morning, Mallory was assigned to check vitals on residents in Hall B. That's where Thomas Granger lived. She knocked lightly and entered his room. He was sitting by the window, watching birds hop across the fence line. Good morning, Mr. Granger, she said softly. No reply. She wheeled the blood pressure cart next to him, gently rolled up his sleeve, and froze. There, just below the crook of his elbow, was a tattoo, but not just any tattoo. It was a broken horse's head, split down the middle by a jagged line, and underneath it, in faded block letters, were the initials H-O. Her breath caught. Her father had shown her a drawing like that once. She was 9 years old. He pulled an old folder from a metal box under the stairs and whispered, "This is Iron Horse, the mission that never happened. The ones who wore this, if you ever meet one, you thank them, and then you let them disappear again." Mallory swallowed hard. She didn't say anything right away, just finished checking his vitals. His pulse was strong, his eyes focused. She lowered his sleeve back down. Thank you, Mr. Granger, she said, her voice suddenly steadier. He turned to her, just slightly. Their eyes met. For the briefest second, something unspoken passed between them. He gave the smallest of nods. That evening, as Mallory was walking past the front desk, she noticed a tall man in uniform standing by the sign-in sheet. He was holding the leather notebook. His hands trembled slightly. "Excuse me," Mallory said. "Can I help you?" The man turned. His name tag read, Cole Philip Monroe, 92nd Infantry Brigade. He looked stunned, like he had just seen a ghost. "Where did you find this?" he asked, holding up the book. "In the attic," Mallory replied. "It was water damaged. No one knew whose it was." Monroe nodded slowly. His eyes scanned the hallway. Then he asked the question that would change everything. "Is there a man here named Thomas Granger?" Colonel Philip Monroe stood there for a moment, unmoving. His eyes stayed fixed on the name Mallory had just mentioned. "Thomas Granger." He said it softly under his breath, like a name from a dream. Then he looked up at her. "I need to speak to him," he said. "Right now, if he's awake." Mallory hesitated. She wasn't sure what was happening, only that her heart had started beating faster. She gave a small nod and turned toward the hallway. "Follow me." They passed the rec room, the fish tank, and the old grandfather clock that never chimed at the right time. Mallory led him down to Hall B, the quietest part of the home, room 112. She knocked lightly, then pushed open the door. "Mr. Granger," she called. "You have a visitor." Thomas was sitting in his usual spot, by the window, staring into the trees. He didn't move when they entered, didn't turn around, but his hands, folded neatly in his lap, tightened just a little. Colonel Monroe took one step forward, then another. Then he removed his cap and stood at attention. "Sir," he said firmly, "this is Colonel Philip Monroe, 92nd Infantry, West Point class of 1996. Still no response. Mallory watched. Her breath caught halfway in her chest. Then Monroe reached into his coat pocket and held up the leather notebook. "I believe this belongs to you, sir." Thomas didn't look at the notebook. Not at first, but he did turn, ever so slowly, to face the man standing in his room. And for the first time since Mallory had arrived at Maple Hill, he spoke. "I burned the rest," he said quietly. "Only kept that one." Monroe swallowed. "Sir, if this is what I think it is, then that book is one of the most important documents the Army never cataloged." Thomas gave a faint smile. There's a reason for that. Mallory looked between them, trying to piece it all together. What is Operation Iron Horse, she asked. Monroe turned to her. An op that was never supposed to exist. 1972. Deep behind lines in Cambodia, it was classified to the highest level, then scrubbed entirely. They deleted names, wiped logs. They said no one made it out alive. He paused. Except, now I know that wasn't true. He opened the leather notebook on the side table. Inside were hand-drawn maps, terrain sketches, extraction routes, red ink slashed through names of soldiers, each one marked MIA, KIA, or lost contact. Near the back, scribbled in the corner of a torn page, was a phrase, if you're reading this, you weren't supposed to. Monroe turned the page and froze. There taped to the final sheet was a single photograph, black and white, 8 men, standing in front of a helicopter at night. None of them were smiling, but all wore the same patch on their shoulder, a broken horse's head inside a hollow circle. I've seen this patch before, Monroe whispered, but only once. In a war college thesis. They said it was a ghost unit, a placeholder name used to simulate worst-case scenarios. He looked at Thomas again. You're telling me this unit was real? Thomas didn't answer right away. Then he reached down and slowly pulled up his sleeve. Mallory's eyes were already there. She didn't need to see it again, but she looked anyway. The same tattoo, the same symbol, worn, weathered, etched not just into his skin, but into his soul. Monroe stepped back, stunned. Sir, I've studied every ghost op the archives ever hinted at. This mission, Iron Horse, you all were sent in to stop a chemical convoy heading toward Allied villages. Weren't you? Thomas nodded once. Convoy was real. Target was moving under UN flags. Our orders were to intercept quietly. What followed was anything but quiet. He stared out the window again. 14 went in. 3 made it out. 1 disappeared on purpose. Mallory blinked. He didn't answer. But she knew. The silence was confirmation enough. The room held its breath. Mallory sat on the edge of the bed, her voice softer than before. My dad, he used to talk about a unit like this. Said if I ever met someone with that tattoo, I should thank them. He said they were the reason he got out of Tain Inn alive. Thomas looked at her now, not as a nurse, not as a stranger, but as someone who knew. I remember Tain Inn. He said, your father. Lieutenant Everett Evans Mallory's eyes filled instantly. Yes, Thomas nodded. He carried a photo of you. It got wet in the rain, but he kept it anyway. You had pigtails. Mallory covered her mouth with both hands. He told me, she whispered, his life was saved by a ghost. Thomas gave a tiny shrug. Guess I wasn't very good at being one. Word of the visit spread quickly through Maple Hill. Staff peeked into the hallway. Nurses murmured outside the door. Someone asked Nurse Mathers what was going on. She rolled her eyes and scoffed. Probably another confused veteran with a story to tell. She said, but even her voice lacked conviction now, because something had changed. The man they'd mocked for watching rocks and humming strange songs was now being saluted by a decorated colonel. And not just saluted, but spoken to with reverence. That evening, Monroe made a call, not to his wife, not to his base, but to West Point. He asked to speak to the director of tactical studies. Then he said 5 words that hadn't been uttered together in over 50 years. Iron Horse was not theoretical. The next morning, 3 officers arrived in unmarked vehicles. They carried clipboards, scanners, and copies of old mission maps. One of them, a young lieutenant with sharp eyes, asked Thomas if he'd be willing to speak on record. He declined, but he let them copy the notebook, all of it, even the margins, even the blood-stained corner. I'll talk once, he said, and only to her. He nodded toward Mallory. She looked surprised, then stood straighter. I'll do my best, she said quietly. I'll get it right. That afternoon, Mallory returned with a recorder and a notepad. No questions, just listening, just letting the story unfold. Thomas didn't speak like a soldier. He spoke like a man unbearing ghosts. He told her about the rain, about the ruined roads, about the smell of burnt metal. He told her how silence became strategy and how his orders were clear. No rescue, no return, no recognition. She listened. She didn't interrupt. And when he finished, she simply said, "Thank you for surviving." That night, when she passed by room 1 and 12, the door was open. He was sitting by the window again. But something had shifted. He wasn't just watching the trees anymore. He was waiting. And this time, he didn't look alone. By the next morning, news had already begun to ripple through the hallways of Maple Hill. The front desk staff were still whispering about the colonel in uniform. Some believed he was just a relative. Others weren't so sure. But nothing prepared them for what happened at 10:17 m. That's when another man in uniform walked through the front doors. Not retired, not in dress blues, but in full active duty fatigues. A soldier who walked like the ground listened to him. He had come to visit his grandmother in room 207, but on the way in, something caught his eye. A leather-bound notebook, left in the tray marked "Lost and Found," its cover cracked, aged, but not forgotten. His hand hovered above it. He didn't touch it at first. Just read the words burned faintly into the leather: Operation Iron Horse, 1972, for eyes that no longer exist. His breath stopped. He picked it up slowly, opened the front cover, flipped through 2 pages, and then froze. The receptionist looked up, confused. "Sir, can I help you?" But the man didn't respond. He was still staring at the names in the margins. Then, without a word, he turned and walked straight down the hallway, past the cafeteria, past the rec room, to Hall B. When he reached room 1 and 12, he didn't knock. He simply stood in the doorway. Thomas Granger looked up, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, the man stepped inside, took off his cap, and saluted. "Sir," he said quietly, "my name is Colonel Philip Monroe, current commanding officer, 92nd Infantry Brigade." Thomas studied him, didn't speak, didn't move. So Monroe held up the notebook. "I found this at the front desk. I believe it belongs to you." Still, Thomas said nothing. Monroe took a breath, then said the words he had never imagined he'd get to say out loud. "West Point teaches Iron Horse as a case study in adaptive field tactics. A theoretical scenario. A ghost operation. Because no one ever confirmed it happened. But if this notebook is real, then you, sir, are not a theory. You're living history." Mallory, who had heard the commotion from the hallway, entered the room just as Monroe finished speaking. She stopped when she saw the colonel, and something in her heart told her this moment was different, bigger than anything she had witnessed in her short time at Maple Hill. Monroe turned slightly to her. "You're the nurse who discovered the tattoo, aren't you?" She nodded, eyes wide. He never said a word. "But when I saw it, I knew." Monroe took a step closer to Thomas. "Sir, that symbol. The horse with the broken head inside a circle." He looked directly at the faded ink on Thomas's arm. "That was the internal marking used by covert operators under Spectre Initiative Phase 1. Mallory looked confused. Spectre Monroe nodded. Spectre Group was created in 1971. Officially, it didn't exist until 1984. But there were earlier versions, test runs operating in Southeast Asia. They didn't have dog tags. They didn't have families. They had symbols and silence. Thomas shifted in his seat. "The circle meant we never came back in a straight line," he murmured. "If the horse was broken, the mission was irreversible." Monroe swallowed hard. His hands trembled slightly as he set the notebook down. "I memorized everything I could about Iron Horse. I thought it was made up, an exercise in failure. But you wrote these pages." He flipped to the final one, the taped photograph, the 8 men, No smiles, no names. I read your notes, sir, Monroe said softly. You carried two of them out on your back. You called for evac 3 days after comms went dark, and then you vanished. Thomas said nothing. He simply stared out the window. His face was blank, but his knuckles were white. Mallory approached gently. Mr. Granger, he's not here to expose you. He's here because he recognized you. Thomas finally spoke again. I left because I had to, not to protect myself, but because the others had wives, children, careers to salvage. I was the only one who didn't have a reason to go home. Monroe blinked. You were the reason they got home. The silence that followed was heavy, not uncomfortable, just full, like a space that had finally been filled after 50 years. Then Monroe stepped back and did something no one at Maple Hill had ever seen. He stood tall, boots together, right hand to brow, and saluted. Not as a gesture, not as a formality, but as a declaration. Thomas Granger had just been publicly acknowledged by a sitting colonel in the United States Army. News of the encounter spread like wildfire. By lunchtime, every staff member knew. Even the cook asked, is it true that he was part of some black ops unit? Nurse Mathers scoffed. I'll believe it when I see the Medal of Honor. But she was already watching the hallway more than usual. By evening, visitors began arriving, not just family, but young officers, cadets, a few retired veterans. They came respectfully, quietly. Some brought flour, some brought notebooks of their own, but none of them tried to take photos. None asked for autographs. They came to look into the eyes of someone they were told didn't exist. That night, Monroe requested a meeting with the director of the nursing home. He offered to fund repairs, upgrades, and even scholarship donations, all in Thomas's name. But more than that, he made a second call. To the Department of Defense, he requested that Operation Iron Horse be declassified, not fully, but just enough to recognize the men who went in and the one who carried them out. The next morning, Mallory brought Thomas his usual breakfast oatmeal. No sugar, with 2 slices of toast. She found him already awake, sitting at his desk. There were 3 envelopes in front of him. One was sealed with red wax. The others were blank. She didn't ask. She just sat beside him. You never told me why you kept that notebook, she said gently. He stared at it. I wasn't sure I existed anymore. But when you found it, when you saw the tattoo, I realized I didn't need to be forgotten. Mallory reached out and placed her hand over his. You never were. That afternoon, the home received an official memo. A ceremony would be held in the garden within the week. Military presence authorized. Cadets from West Point would attend. And at the center of it all, an old man who once vanished on purpose would finally be seen. 1 week later, the garden at Maple Hill was quiet, not empty, just still. Spring had come early that year. The dogwoods were blooming. Sunlight filtered through the trees like soft gold. Fold-out chairs were placed in neat rows. A small wooden platform had been built near the flagpole, and on it sat one simple chair, sturdy, worn, facing east toward the rising sun. That morning, every resident had been dressed and wheeled out early. Even the ones who rarely left their rooms, even the ones who never smiled, because something important was happening today. Thomas Granger had asked for one thing: no medals, no rank, no fanfare, just silence, and the right kind of silence, the kind that came with understanding. Mallory was the one who planned the ceremony. She wrote every word herself, and when she read it aloud, her voice trembled. Good afternoon, she began softly. My name is Mallory Evans. I am a nurse, a daughter, and a student of what courage really means. She glanced toward Thomas, seated quietly to her right. He wore a collared shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. The tattoo was visible, not as a statement, none but as truth. In 1972, she continued, a unit was sent deep behind enemy lines in Southeast Asia. They had no backup, no clear extraction plan, and no expectation of returning. She paused. This operation was erased from history, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well and cost too much. She held up the notebook. This is all that remains. And the man who wrote it down, who carried others through fire, and then disappeared so they could live freely, has lived among us ever since, quietly, unrecognized, until now. The wind moved gently through the trees. No one clapped. No one coughed. Even the birds seemed to hush. Then came the sound, low, steady, an engine. A bus pulled up to the front gate of Maple Hill. Its doors opened with a hiss. One by one, they stepped out. Cadets, dozens of them. From West Point, pressed uniforms, clean boots, faces young but eyes trained. They walked in perfect formation across the gravel. Not a word spoken, not a glance out of line. They stopped in front of the platform, then turned and saluted. Thomas looked up, his hand resting on his lap, trembled just slightly. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then slowly, deliberately, he returned the salute. His hand wasn't as steady as it used to be, but the meaning was clear. They weren't saluting a name or a rank. They were saluting a legacy. From the back of the crowd, another figure stepped forward. Colonel Monroe. He walked toward the stage, holding a folder in one hand and a folded flag in the other. His voice, when he spoke, was clear but reverent. Mr. Granger, he said, on behalf of the Department of Defense, the United States Army, and every life touched by your actions, both known and unknown, it is my honor to deliver this citation. He opened the folder. For extraordinary acts of valor under extreme duress, for leadership without recognition, and for 50 years of unacknowledged service, we recognize Thomas Granger as the final confirmed operative of Operation Iron Horse. He closed the folder. Some heroes walk through parades, others walk through fire, then disappear so others may rest. Nurse Mathers stood off to the side, arms crossed, eyes lowered. She didn't smile. But as the final words were spoken, she walked forward, not quickly, not as a nurse, but as a witness. She stopped in front of Thomas, and for the first time in her 20 years at Maple Hill, she bowed her head. I was wrong, she said quietly. I saw the silence, but not the weight it carried. Thomas gave her a slight nod. No resentment, no triumph, just acceptance. After the formalities, the cadets formed a line. Each one approached the chair where Thomas sat. They didn't speak, didn't ask questions. They simply looked him in the eye and saluted, one by one, a silent procession of respect. And when the last cadet stepped forward, a young woman with freckles and a ribbon in her pocket, she paused. Then she leaned down and whispered, my grandfather always said he owed his life to a man with a broken horse on his arm. She stepped back, saluted, and walked away. Mallory stayed beside him long after the others had gone. The sun dipped lower, the light turned golden, and for the first time, Thomas looked peaceful. She placed the notebook on his lap, its cover worn, its pages no longer secret. You did it, she said softly. You were never just a ghost. He smiled, not wide, not bright, but real. I was never trying to be one. He said, I just didn't want anyone else to carry what I saw. Later that evening, when the guests had gone and the garden had emptied, Thomas remained on the chair. He didn't want to go back inside yet. Not just yet. Mallory brought him a blanket. She sat next to him. The stars began to come out. Do you think they'll remember, he asked. She looked up at the sky. They already are. Back inside, a new plaque had been mounted near the entrance. Polished wood, simple engraving. In honor of Thomas Granger, 1972. Operation Iron Horse. He walked where others wouldn't and waited for us to come find him. Somewhere far away, in a lecture hall at West Point, A new instructor prepared a revised curriculum, one that no longer taught Iron Horse's theory, but as truth. And in every lesson, the students would learn not just the tactics, but the man who carried them. Quiet, steady, and hidden in plain sight for 50 years. As the final light faded, Thomas closed his eyes. He wasn't gone, just resting. And across the nation, in rooms, in homes, in bases and offices, the story of a quiet man with a tattoo no one noticed was finally heard. This is a grateful story for the ones who disappear, so others can return, and for the quiet salute that took 50 years to arrive.